A black man in a pilot's uniform walks into the first-class cabin, his every step met with icy stares. Whispers ripple through the air, and then it happens. A flight attendant blocks his path, her voice sharp. This section is for first-class passengers only. The room falls silent, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. But then, with unshakable calm, he speaks 3 simple words that leave everyone frozen in their seats. What happens next will shake your very beliefs about prejudice and power. Before we jump into today's story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you love powerful stories of justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let's get started. He wasn't just another face in the crowd. Captain Elijah Brooks was a man of quiet power. From the moment he stepped into a room, his tall frame and commanding presence turned heads, though not always for the right reasons. As one of the youngest black pilots at his airline, Elijah had navigated more than just the skies. He had spent years battling a storm of prejudice, proving time and again that he belonged in a cockpit. But today wasn't about proving himself in the air. It was about a moment he never saw coming. When Elijah entered the first-class cabin that day, he wasn't looking for recognition or applause. He just wanted to get to his seat, a small respite before commanding the very plane these passengers were about to board. Little did he know, this walk down the aisle would be a journey into something far bigger than himself. Because as Elijah approached his assigned seat, the whispers started. And then came the question that stopped him in his tracks. What makes you think you belong here? The question hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Elijah paused, his steady gaze meeting the flight attendant's doubtful eyes. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, murmurs that weren't just whispers but judgments, each one a reminder of the bias he had faced his entire life. Elijah took a breath, steadying himself. This wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated, but something about this moment felt heavier. The flight attendant crossed her arms, glancing down at the clipboard in her hand as if searching for an excuse to deny him. Passengers leaned in, curiosity etched on their faces, some smirking, others silently rooting for him to fail. "Sir," she said, her tone cold and detached, "I'm going to need to see your ticket." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the neatly folded boarding pass and handing it over. Her eyes flickered as she examined it, and then came the words he'd been expecting, but still stung like a slap. "This can't be right. Are you sure you're in the right section?" Elijah's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. But even as he spoke, he could feel the weight of the stairs boring into him, questioning his very presence. And just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get any worse, someone from the back chimed in, loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe he just borrowed that uniform. Laughter rippled through the cabin, cruel and dismissive. Elijah's fingers clenched into a fist at his side, but he didn't react. Not yet. He had learned long ago that power wasn't in reacting. It was in responding. And his response was coming. Because what happened next would silence every laugh, every whisper, and every shred of doubt in that room. Elijah didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. Instead, he leaned in closer, locking eyes with the flight attendant, and said calmly, "Check the name on the uniform." Her eyes flicked to the gold nameplate on his chest, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. It was there in bold, unmistakable letters. Captain Elijah Brooks. Still, she hesitated, as if her mind couldn't reconcile the truth in front of her with the prejudice she held. Behind him, passengers whispered more furiously now. Some gasped as they pieced together the reality of the situation. This wasn't just a man in a pilot's uniform. This was the man who would be flying their plane. Elijah could feel the shift, the tension growing thicker with every second of silence. "I don't understand," the flight attendant finally stammered, her confidence wavering. "Are you saying—" "I'm not saying anything," Elijah replied, his voice steady but firm. "I'm showing you, And when you board this plane, it'll be my voice welcoming you over the intercom. It'll be my hands guiding us safely to our destination. So, yes, I belong here. But the question is," he paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Do you?" Her face flushed, but she said nothing. Meanwhile, the passengers who had laughed moments ago now sat in stunned silence. Elijah didn't just occupy the space, he owned it, his presence a quiet declaration of his worth and capability. But even as the whispers died down, Elijah knew this wasn't over, because in a moment, the truth of who he was would be undeniable, and the entire first-class cabin was about to witness it firsthand. The silence in the cabin was deafening, broken only by the hum of the aircraft engines outside. Elijah stood tall, but beneath his calm exterior, the weight of years of prejudice pressed against him. He could feel the eyes of every passenger burning into his back, a mix of confusion, doubt, and growing unease. The flight attendant fumbled with her clipboard, her hands trembling as she flipped through the passenger manifest. She muttered under her breath, "This can't be right. This can't be right." "Why don't you check again?" Elijah said, his tone steady but cutting through the tension like a blade. Passengers began pulling out their phones, some pretending to scroll aimlessly, others subtly recording the scene. Every movement, every word was being documented. The whispers turned into hushed discussions as the gravity of the situation dawned on them. "Excuse me," a voice suddenly rang out from behind. It was an older man, dressed in a crisp business suit, standing with his arms crossed. "Are we seriously going to let someone who plays dress-up delay this flight? First class isn't a place for charity cases." Elijah turned his head slightly, his eyes narrowing on the man. He didn't say a word, but the silence he projected spoke volumes. It was the kind of silence that dared anyone to challenge him further. The flight attendant, visibly rattled now, tapped on her earpiece and whispered to someone on the other end. Moments later, another crew member arrived, a senior officer with a commanding presence. She glanced at Elijah, then at the crowd, immediately sensing the storm brewing. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice sharp and authoritative. The flight attendant stammered, He claims he's supposed to be here, but..." Before she could finish, the senior officer cut her off. "Claims?" she said, raising an eyebrow. She turned to Elijah, a knowing look in her eyes. "Captain Brooks, is everything all right?" The cabin froze. Gasps rippled through the room as the title Captain hung in the air like a thunderclap. The passengers looked at each other, their expressions a mix of shock and shame. Elijah nodded slowly, his voice calm but firm. "I was just explaining that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, but it seems that's a hard concept for some people to grasp." The senior officer's lips tightened, and she turned to the flight attendant, her expression now unreadable. "Escort Captain Brooks to his seat," she said firmly, "and ensure this doesn't happen again. Am I clear?" But even as Elijah took his rightful seat, he could feel the tension shift into something else. This wasn't over, not yet, because the truth about him was now unraveling, and with it, the prejudices of everyone around him were about to be laid bare. As the plane taxied to the runway, the first-class cabin remained eerily quiet. Every passenger who had doubted Elijah now sat stiffly, the reality of their assumptions gnawing at them. But the silence was short-lived. A voice crackled over the intercom, smooth and steady, radiating authority. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain, Elijah Brooks, speaking. Welcome aboard." The words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through the cabin. Heads whipped around, eyes wide with disbelief. Elijah's voice, calm and composed, continued. "Our flight today will take us to our destination safely and on time. I want to thank you for choosing us, and I look forward to giving you a smooth and enjoyable journey." The flight attendant who had questioned him stood frozen in the aisle, her clipboard dangling limply in her hand. The older man in the business suit who had insulted him sank back in his chair, his face a mask of regret and embarrassment. And then Elijah did something no one expected. he stepped out of the cockpit, just for a moment, to look at the cabin. His uniform, his gold captain's stripes, and the confidence in his posture left no room for doubt. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs, "in case there's still any confusion, I'm not here by chance. I'm here because I earned it, and I'll make sure every one of you reaches your destination safely, no matter what you thought of me when I walked in." The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't judgment. It was respect. A slow ripple of applause started, hesitant at first, but it grew louder as passengers realized the magnitude of what they had witnessed. But for Elijah, this wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about something bigger, showing that no amount of prejudice could ever ground someone who was born to fly. The applause eventually faded, but the weight of what had just unfolded lingered in the air. Elijah returned to the cockpit, his focus already on the skies ahead. For him, this was another day in a long career of breaking barriers. But for the passengers, it was a moment they wouldn't forget. As the plane soared through the clouds, the once dismissive business traveler sat quietly, staring out the window, his arrogance replaced by reflection. The flight attendant who had doubted Elijah made her way to the cockpit door during the flight, softly knocking. When Elijah opened it, she looked at him, eyes downcast, and said the words he rarely heard but always longed for. "I'm sorry." Elijah nodded, accepting her apology without a word. For him, it wasn't about forcing people to acknowledge their mistakes. It was about teaching them to see beyond their biases. When the plane landed and the passengers disembarked, many paused to thank him, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine admiration. As Elijah watched them leave, he felt a quiet sense of victory, not because he had proven himself, but because he had reminded them of a deeper truth. The lesson was simple yet profound. Never judge someone by the seat they occupy or the uniform they wear. True worth is found in the strength of character, the resilience to rise, and the integrity to stay grounded in the face of adversity. Elijah Brooks wasn't just a pilot. He was a symbol of perseverance and a living testament to the power of shattering stereotypes. Because in the end, it wasn't about the applause or the validation. It was about inspiring others to see the humanity in everyone, no matter where they come from or what they look like. And as the plane prepared for its next journey, Elijah knew one thing for certain. The sky was limitless, but so was his determination to rise above. Thank you for watching. Maya's story reminds us that standing up for what's right can create lasting change. Whether it's overcoming adversity or challenging injustice, your voice matters. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts on the story. Let's keep this conversation going. And remember, sharing these stories helps spread the message of justice and fairness, one act of courage at a time. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.